All right, so this is my last actual lecture for this class. I am going to go over a bit about research and more specifically about the precede-proceed model. I think that is the biggest thing that we can review. I want you guys to feel fairly secure about the precede-proceed model because you are going to be using that in 303 and 304. In this class, we start with the beginning, and then the next class, you'll do the second phase of it. So we're just concerned about the first phase, and then how it relates to children, conception, all the way to 11 or 12 years old. In the next classes, you'll be doing different age groups and different parts of the precede-proceed model. So I want you to leave this class having a firm foundation in how we use this model, and then also some research models and designs that you might use within this framework as well. I did want to touch on what the next steps are. It should be listed in Coursera course in written form, but I just wanted to talk about, after this review, I will have a study guide about the precede-proceed model and research designs on Coursera courses. So it is a variety of multiple choice and true-false questions relating to research this week. So that's really kind of what we're focusing on. Next week, I won't have a lecture. I'll just have a much longer study guide about child development issues, ACEs, bilingualism, different age groups, infant, toddler, middle childhood. It's everything. That's why I can't review in a lecture, is to take 15 weeks of information that we learned about children and distill into one lecture would be a little bit hard. And it's not like a traditional class where I can see you face to face. I can see what you struggled with by the looks on your face, or you can ask me questions in a kind of a face-to-face model. So we don't really have that. So kind of how I try to review it by giving you study guides. So next week you will have another study guide with more questions about children. It's the same kind of setup as the midterm. You're going to work through those study guide questions. You're going to research them if you need to, if you want to get a study group going with other friends that are in the class or in other friends that are taking different sections of this. However you kind of want to do it, that would be a great thing to do, is to work through those questions, because the questions from this week and the questions from next week are the actual question bank that I'm going to draw from for the final. So all the questions on the final will be in the study guide from this week, and then they'll also be in the study guide for next week. So if you spend any time at all working through those questions, you will be prepared to take the final. That's how I use it in the online space, is that the actual act of you researching and understanding the questions helps you prepare then to go ahead and take the final. I'm not going to release an answer key or anything like that. I'm giving you the questions. If you get stuck, please email me if something seems like kind of an odd question, or I phrased it wrong, or you just kind of don't understand what I'm asking, or you're really struggling to find the research behind this. Please email me. That's what I'm here for. I'm more than happy to answer any of your questions, or we can have a Zoom conference if there's specific issues about children you want to talk about more, or after the class ends, if you just kind of want to pick my brain professionally about options that you might want to take once you've kind of graduated in human development, or you just want to talk about anything in general. I am more than happy to do that. That's kind of what I love about classes and teaching, is being able to talk with students. So if you ever want to meet me or talk after the class ends, I am available for that as well. But let's dive right in. A lot of these slides are taken from things that we've already talked about all semester, so I'm just kind of trying to distill what we've learned about. So once again, we're phase one of the precede-proceed model. We're just doing the precede phase. It's child development, conception to age 11, 12, and then the precede phase. Once you go to 303 and 304, you're going to look at the second phase and then evaluations from various perspectives. So by the time you've taken this kind of 3-class arc, you should be really, really familiar with research design, research models, how to evaluate programs, how to implement programs, how to do program identification, all those types of things. You should feel great about children as a whole, and then also the frameworks and designs of research. Okay, so what we've really kind of talked about in this class as well is the topic, perspectives, and disciplines of child development. So when I started off, I kind of did an overview. We did conception, pregnancy, that type of stuff. Then we jumped into infants and toddlers. Then we did preschool. Then we did early preschool, which is also early development. Then we did middle development, kind of our middle childhood development, which is our kind of forgotten years, early elementary school, through kind of middle school. And then we did and then we jumped into kind of special topics. So I've done ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, bilingualism, family services, and things like that. And then I also did child abuse as well. So I hope by doing that, you have a firm understanding of children 0 to 11, and then you have some of the community and societal influences that then work on and contribute to children as a whole. So that was kind of my goal with the class. I do want to jump to PRECEDE. I want to remind you it's an acronym: predisposing, reinforcing, enabling, and those are our factors, which are also causes in educational diagnosis and evaluation. So the PRECEDE model, I just want to remind you, is an actual acronym. So when we are kind of planning, this is kind of the picture I've tried to use throughout, is we're trying to identify outcomes. So outcomes that affect quality of life. Are they behavioral? Are they health? Are they lifestyle? Are they environmental? Which outcome are you kind of looking at? And through the forum posts this class as well, I've attempted to kind of work through them. So last week we were talking about child abuse, factors and policy that might play into child abuse, identification or prevention. It was up to you. So that would be an outcome. You guys needed to identify an outcome. A lot of it was identification of child abuse or prevention of child abuse. It's really kind of the only two kind of, I mean, we could have a much more detailed quality of life outcome, but that's the general overarching theme with child abuse, is you want to prevent it or you want to be able to identify it in order to get those children out of the houses, out of the homes in which they might be experiencing this. So the quality of life, we've done a lot, I think, of health. We start a lot with health status, and because this is a community health kind of model, it typically starts with that. So a lot of the things that we've talked about have been postpartum depression, obesity, car seats, things like that. And then what are the behavioral, lifestyle, and environmental concerns that play into that kind of health status? And that shows up, that comes up a lot as well in the factors that influence that outcome, that part, that predisposing, enabling, reinforcing factors. And that's where we see a lot of the behavioral, the lifestyle, and the environmental concerns as well. And we will talk more about that in just a little bit. And then the kind of the very last part is the policies, resources, organizations, services, things like that. And that's why I tried to touch on that kind of last in our forum post, is that you were leading with a policy, a resource, and an organization, something like that, that has an impact with child abuse. And I think you guys did a fantastic job talking about the child abuse index, which I had forgot to mention in my lecture, which is like for law enforcement and kind of lawyers and stuff like that, is that's kind of where we see the pattern of abuse. So when you have a child abuse substantiated claim, it goes into or unsubstantiated, it goes into a central abuse index. And that's where, like, if law enforcement hopefully are coming out to a house and this is the 10th time that they've had something that's in the central index, and that will give them a little bit more information about the family, either support services that they need or getting CW at Child Welfare Services or CPS, Child Protective Services, more involved in the care of this child. That's the hope. That's kind of the things that we've been working on, is having this be another safety net for children. So thank you. I think it was Karen who brought that up. That was fantastic. So those are the policies, resources, organizations, and that's kind of the end part of this planning phase, this PRECEDE phase in the PP model. So I do want to mention as well that the PRECEDE PROCEED model focuses on the community as well. So we talked about this when we were talking about vaccinations, which was back in, I think, the preschool or early childhood development section. So we know that it's voluntary. So a target population should be actively involved and active participants in the health promotion program. And that's why a lot of the PRECEDE PROCEED model is built on questionnaires, like we saw with the violence in the home study as well, is what do they think? What are they already doing? What do they need support on? And I also really like that in this class we talk a lot about political issues, economic issues, health issues, environment issues, belief systems, and things like that, and how that makes the ecological model around the child. So already brought from Benner's ecological model, it's, you know, all the rings that are supporting the child, influencing the child and their development. And I think the precede proceed model does a good job of taking all of these things and seeing how public health and health outcomes, lifestyle outcomes are influenced by all of these kind of factors that we have talked about. And not only is it a physical state, but it's a tool that helps individuals and communities to accomplish their goals and live fulfilling lives. And that especially comes into play with children. Children, you can't, especially in the 0 to 5, 0 to 10, you really can't take them out of the family system. So looking at the individuals, their families, and their communities, and how the mix of those types of things helps the children to have better lifestyle outcomes, health outcomes, things like that. Okay, so I'm gonna go way back to the very first week that I lectured when we were talking about this fantastic precede proceed model from Samoa, which is talking about evacuation zones for tsunamis and things like that. I keep going back to this because I think that this has the best kind of graphic for explaining it. And that's why I bring it up in the beginning and then I bring it up in the end, is because I think it takes all of the different parts of the precede part of the model and breaks it down really, really easily for us. So in phase 1, we've got our social assessment. We've got what do we need in order to evacuate people safely? What is going to be our outcome? So do we need safety zones, improved evacuation routes, readiness meetings, PSA, just general preparedness? That's the general quality of life outcome that we're going for. Epidemiology, epidemiological assessment. I still skip over. I still struggle with that word epidemiological. Even 16 weeks in, it's always been a tongue twister for me. So epidemiology, once again, is kind of looking at public health as a whole. I'll talk a little bit more about in a bit, but in America, Samoa, they were most likely using large scale research, either from the CDC or whatever the equivalent is in America, Samoa, in order to get the ideas that the people on this island were a bit hindered by health conditions related to obesity. Some people had mobility issues, wheelchairs, crutches, things like that. And then they also were able to get some information about evacuation routes, which wouldn't even be in a CDC or a public health model. That would be from another kind of source of like transportation, or here in San Diego County, it's called SANDAG, which is kind of the county group that has to do with transportation and things like that. They also have information about evacuation routes or non-evacuation routes. So in this case, almost a quarter of the community did not have evacuation rates or routes that could service them. All right, so then we're looking at the factors. So the pre-part, the predisposing, reinforcing, and enabling factors. So what do people already know about tsunami preparedness as an individual or as a family unit? What do the behaviors say about it? What does the media say about it? What does a health and wellness center say about enabling factors? So that would be some of the obesity and mobility issues. How can the wellness factors influence and factor into a public health model around getting people to safely evacuate a community in a very fast manner? One of my friends actually worked on this. I think I talked about it a little bit. It was here in San Diego County. She's actually trying to track down the working paper that they released, but I think it bears mentioning that this can be for any community. So here in the North County area, it was figuring out the same type of thing, but for our migrant communities. And so they, by doing this, it was the same type of thing. So what safety zones do we need? How can we get the word out about this type of stuff? And communities that might be really far apart and might also be changing by the migrant status. So coming to work crops, leaving when that kind of work is done. So they had to do some epidemiological assessment, which really played a part into what the ethnicity of the migrant workers and what the language of the migrant workers was. So for example, most people, especially if you're coming from the Midwest, when they see California, they just think that every single person who's immigrated has come from Mexico and speaks Spanish. For most of us, we know that that is not true. We have a lot of people from Central America, or from communities in Mexico which still speak indigenous languages, and Spanish is a second language, and then English is a third language. So they were trying to figure out how can they take this information and put it into different dialects, regional dialects, get this information out, and then also most of the people who were doing the study were of a Mexican descent, but were American. How, as Latina and Latino American citizens, how were they going to be interacting with a newer immigrant population who was also migrant as well? So then they also had to look at the same type of factors. What do people already know? What are they being told in the media, if anything at all? And then how is health and wellness going to play into this? And then a lot of the enabling factors were like immigration status as well. And then administrative policy. This was years ago. I wanted to say she told me. I'm still trying to track down the research, and so is she. But I'm trying to, it was way before some of the current political issues with dreamers and sanctuary cities and stuff like that. So the policies were a little bit different. It would be very interesting to do the study again and now look at it through the lens of recent political issues. Sanctuary cities might be playing into this dreamer status as well. So I just wanted to bring that up as a sidebar about how well the pre-seed proceed model works with the community that we have. North County is incredibly diverse. The things that I just talked about are very, very specific to San Diego County. And so it takes into account what we need as a group in order to support some of the more vulnerable populations among us. All right, so I want to jump into the predisposing, reinforcing, and enabling factors, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago. So some predisposing factors would be knowledge. What do you know already? What do you need to know? Like with eating and things like that. I talked about a Kentucky pre-seed proceed model study about looking at like wintertime and what kind of foods do you have available to you. So what is their knowledge about healthy eating already? What is their knowledge about being able to cook low sodium, low fat foods? What are your attitudes about that as well? So you might know how to cook it, but if you don't think that it's worthwhile or it's interesting or it's maybe considered elite to eat in a different way, having family from Ohio and Kentucky, sometimes they look at my specific diet as somebody who was born and raised in Southern California. You know, chia seed puddings, green smoothies, all that type of stuff is like very like considered. It's not something that is part of their cultural heritage or something that they have grown up, and so they look at it sometimes with suspicion. What are their beliefs about food? What are their values about food? What food is good? What food is bad? Do they have ideas about that? Do they have a morality of food? You know, things like that. So that's some of the predisposing factors that you might be working at. In each research model that you do, it's going to be different. When we looked at child restraints, so our one from Australia about indigenous communities and white communities and how they use car seats, what are their knowledge and attitudes already about car seats and properly restraining your children in cars. Reinforcing factors as well, your community and your family, your health professionals, your peers, your smaller family unit, your larger family unit, and then what are the kind of the norms about it as well. So what is your community telling you about a specific thing as well. Enabling factors, so resources, services, and government services. And I like this one. It doesn't have anything to do with children, but I think it's really interesting that some enabling factors would be, this was talking about like the Industrial Revolution and things like that in Britain in the 1800s. So before the Industrial Revolution and the advent of trains, you are more isolated. It took a lot longer to get from one community to another, even in a small island like England. So factors that made travel possible: better transport, so trains, railways, and then subway systems; better communications, that's also when the telegraph came along; faster and cheaper travel, leading to differences in accommodations, facilities, services as well. And this made travel possible. This brought ideas to different parts of England as a whole, enabling some of the Industrial Revolution ideas to gain faster, and also brought in labor movements and things like that as well. The Industrial Revolution, I'm going to do a whole class someday on the Industrial Revolution and how it kind of changed our whole ideas about children and childhood. I wrote a whole paper on that in grad school. it's a love of mine in how 500 years ago, what we thought about children is very different than how we think about it now, and a lot of that has to do with the Industrial Revolution. So through this, it kind of shows that resources, services, technology, and the government really changed to make travel and longer distance travel much more possible. And that's an enabling factor in this case. Enabling factors can also be like health and wellness, ability to access those types of things. So once again, in the Samoa example that I've been talking about, knowledge and attitudes about where you are, how you're prepared, what does the media tell you, what does your family tell you about tsunamis, should you care, should you not care? Do you have health centers and wellness centers in which you can work on those mobility issues, or your overweight or obesity issues as well. So I do want to jump into the outcomes diagnosis and assessment. So I think I have, yeah. So when we're talking about those types of things, behavioral, environmental, epidemiological, and social, here they are right here. So the lifestyle, the environment, the health status, how do these factors impact those kinds of areas? So assessment. So once again, our social assessment is economic assessment, social indicators for the population as a whole and for the individual. So if you think back to one of our first pre-seed, proceed, it was a working paper talking about prenatal and infant mortality for African Americans in Minnesota. And so what are the economic and social indicators for the population as a whole of Minnesota, maybe African American mothers and white mothers, and then individual as well, using perhaps a case study. I'm going to get to epidemiological in a little bit. Behavioral as well, specific health-related actions that cause, support, or impact health outcomes. So something that causes it, something that supports it, and something that impacts it, or something that's detrimental to those health outcomes. So maybe a health outcome that we looked at was postpartum depression in Iran. That was another one that I talked about. Or the Kentucky eating one as well. So what causes poor eating habits in a rural area, or what kind of, or postpartum depression? We don't know what the cause is. We know that some certain people kind of can have issues with it. What supports the network around these families? What supports the health outcomes in Kentucky? And what impacts it. So in Kentucky, not being near, like being in a food desert, or being in a rural area where you can't access high quality grocery stores, or not having pantries stocked with fresh food throughout the year like we are spoiled with here in Southern California. And then with the postpartum one as well, what impacts those health outcomes? We know that there can be health outcomes on the mother and the child when a mother has some issues with postpartum depression. So what would impact that? Not having a social support network, not having midwives who can identify it, not getting the treatment that you need, those types of things. Then we also have the environmental assessments as well. So factors that play into physical and social environment. So how do the behaviors that we have or do not have impact the quality of life outcomes, like access, once again, to food pantries in Kentucky, or in Samoa, having access to health centers or places that can support you medically, that type of thing. So epidemiology or epidemiological, why do people get ill? Why do they get hurt, sick, or have poor health? So this is kind of a big topic. You could do a whole class on this, but it's the study and analysis of the distribution and determinants of health and disease conditions in defined populations. So really what we're kind of looking at is the occurrence rate and frequency of a disease. That's the real like medical model, but you could do occurrence rate and frequency of any kind of health outcome as well. People using car seats for their children, people having postpartum depression, people having higher infant mortality based on race, anything like that. And then how common is it? So in epidemiology, I talked about it before. It started in England once again with somebody who was looking at cholera, and then it came from a water pump in like inner super dense urban area in London. They still have the water pump to this day. So when he was looking at that, he was using incidence and prevalence to try to identify who was getting sick, what neighborhood were they in, how old were they male or female, looking at all of these kind of puzzle pieces to fit them together to be like, this is the water pump on this corner in this part of England that made 500 people sick and killed 200 of them, because this is where it was infected with cholera. Maybe 3 blocks away in a different part of London that wasn't using that, people were not getting sick. So we're looking at rate and frequency of people getting sick, and then how common was it in a specific kind of geographical location. So we do those types of assessments to look at those types of things. But this isn't you, unless you go much farther and you get a doctorate and you go to a large group or an organization, you're not going to be doing epidemiological research on your own. It's something that you are going to be using research that's already been done from you from Health and Human Services, even in San Diego, or you're going to be using it from the Centers for Disease Control, the CDC. They're the ones, or any kind of federal government organizations as well, the census as well, mortality and morbidity tables and things like that. That's where you're going to get your epidemiological data. It's really hard and it's really expensive to get this much data about any kind of population, and that's why we have to go to different sources in order to use it to say why it's important. So a couple of weeks ago, we looked at the study in Canada about psychosis, and so they took certain information from Canada's version of these in order to talk about what the prevalence is. How common is it that people have psychosis at different ages and different populations in this part of Canada, which I think was like Quebec or something like that. I did want to talk about another way that we use epidemiological data, and that's years of life loss, and that's really come to us with ACEs. So adverse childhood experiences, we could talk if you have 3 or more ACEs. So if you had substance abuse and domestic violence and poverty when you were growing up, that could potentially take 20 years off of your life, so years of life loss, because of poor health outcomes related to those ACEs that you had when you were growing up. I did want to talk about reliability and validity because I'm not sure that I did a fantastic job lecturing about it about 6 weeks ago. It's important because it's a research model, it's a research design that has to come into play with the pre-seed proceed model. So you're not going to see reliability and validity built into the framework, but it is a part of research and research design that you will use and you need to know about or be familiar with, so you can learn more about it in the other classes. So reliability is just consistency, and validity is accuracy. That's more of the like strict definition. Once we're looking into psychology, it's like satisfy the objective. So what was the objective of the research study, or what was the outcome that you were trying to look at? So I found a really good example that I wanted to use, which is your thermometer. So if you have a thermometer that you put under your tongue for your child, if it is a degree off, it's going to be reliable. It's going to be consistent. It's always going to give you the temperature that's a degree off. But it's not going to be valid because it's not recording the right temperature. So you're always going to be off. So you're either going to always take the temperature and subtract or add a degree, because you know that it's always going to be reliable. It's always going to give you the actual temperature, just a degree off. But it's not recording the actual and correct temperature. So when we're looking at the bullseye, it is reliable, but it's not valid. So it's over here because we're trying to get a bullseye with our archery. So we would like everything to be in the middle. We would like it to be both consistent and to satisfy the objectives. If you had something that was not reliable, so it's inconsistent data that's all over the place, it's telling you multiple things that might even be contradicting each other, it might be valid, it might satisfy the objectives. We're looking at, a really difficult subject, language, race, healthcare, all this type of stuff. But it's difficult to take that data and to understand it and to make it into something that you can disseminate to the population as a whole within a research study if it's not consistent. So really what we're looking for is consistency and accuracy when we're looking at or making our research models and our research design, and even with the pre-seed proceed model, looking at the data or the information that we have, we need it to be both reliable and valid. So in conclusion, this whole class, we've been learning about children ages 0 to 12 through this framework of the pre-seed proceed model. So over this last week, you're going to have research and pre-seed proceed model questions to use as a study guide. I will take some of these. They will be in a question bank that I will then draw the final questions from. Next week, I'm going to release the child development related study guide, which is much longer than that. There won't be a lecture though. And then I will take some of those questions from that thing as well. So the final is going to be online from 5/12 to 5/17. And then 5/17 is not Sunday. It's not Sunday. It's not Sunday. It's not Sunday. I just need to put that in there. So the class actually ends on 5/17. I need to start doing grades if you guys would like to know how you've done. Most of you have done fantastic. But if you want me to be able to record grades in any kind of timely manner, it needs to be done at 5/17 at 3:45. I'm going to close it at that time. It's going to be graded. I'm going to start taking your grades, putting them into my Excel spreadsheets, calculating them so that I can go online and I can record them for you. So you have all of this time in order to look at the final that you've already seen the questions for. So 5/17, I believe, is a Thursday or a Friday. So it needs to be done at 3:45. I know that I'm harping on this, but somebody always kind of like misses the point that it needs to be done by Thursday, May 17th at 3:45. It's going to close then. That is when the final is going to close. It needs to be done by that date, not Sunday, like you've done in all the other parts of the assignment. So I'm going to also have all this information on Cougar courses for you, but I just want to drill it into your head that you have this kind of week in order to work on this final. It's not Sunday though. All right. Thanks so much, guys. I hope this was helpful for you, and start working on that research and pre-seed proceed model study guide that I have on Cougar courses right now. All right. Thanks so much. Have a great week.